The twin suns of Arcanine burned hot above the cracked desert plains. The ground shimmered with heat and the air trembled with dust. Nothing lived long here unless it was strong, cunning, or ruthless. To the hunters of this world, weakness meant death. That was the first lesson every child of her kind learned. And she was no child. She was a warrior, born and trained for the hunt. Her name was Kara, and today her prey was unlike any she had pursued before. The command from her people had been clear. A human male had been sighted on the outer edge of their territory. He had no ship, no weapons beyond crude tools, and no allies. He was alone, cut off from his kind. She had laughed when she received the order. A human? Prey so soft, so fragile. Their skin tore easily, their bodies broke under pressure, their bones snapped like dried twigs. What challenge could such a creature give her? It seemed insulting. To send her for this task, yet duty was duty. She would hunt him, claim his head, and bring it back as proof of her victory. Still, when she looked at the sand below and saw his trail, something in her chest shifted. The tracks were not clumsy. They were not the marks of a desperate animal fleeing. They showed patience. They showed care. The human had walked in circles, had doubled back, had used the wind to cover his path. She frowned. Prey should panic. Prey should make mistakes. But these prints spoke of a mind that thought ahead. For 2 days she shadowed him across the plains. She saw the smoke of his small fires, always shielded by rocks to hide the light. She saw how he collected water by digging at the roots of desert plants, how he sharpened stones into blades, how he used every scrap he found. He wasted nothing. She had expected weakness, but what she found was persistence. The man refused to. From the ridge of a jagged canyon, Kara finally saw him with her own eyes. He was lean, covered in dust, his clothes torn and patched with strips of hide. His skin was burned by the sun, but his movements were steady. He carried a spear fashioned from bone and stone. He moved not like prey, but like a creature who belonged here. Even though she knew he did not, she studied him for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She imagined how it would end, her claws closing around his throat, his eyes wide with fear, his body falling limp as she stood victorious. That was how every hunt ended. That was how it had to end. Night came, and shadows stretched across the land. Kara followed him down into the canyon. She was silent, her body low, her every step measured. Her people prided themselves on being unseen, on striking before the prey even sensed danger. She was already imagining the triumph of her return. As she closed in, the human moved suddenly, his head turned. His eyes locked on the darkness where she hid. For the briefest moment, their gazes met. She froze. How had he known? She had made no sound. The wind had covered her scent. Yet his eyes pierced through the shadows and saw her. The man did not run. Instead, he stepped backward slowly, drawing her deeper into the canyon. He held his spear firm in his hands, his body tense but steady. She felt a flicker of surprise. Most prey screamed. Most prey begged or fled. But this one was waiting for her. Kara lunged, her muscles propelling her forward with deadly speed. The human swung his spear, not to strike but to trigger something. Hidden in the sand. A trap snapped shut between them, ropes pulled taut by stone weights, sending shards of rock flying. She twisted aside just in time, her armor scraped by stone, her path broken. By the time she recovered, the man had already vanished into the canyon shadows. Her chest rose with sharp breaths, and for the first time in many hunts, she felt not triumph but frustration. Prey was not supposed to think like this. Prey was not supposed to set traps for the hunter. She tracked him deeper into the canyon. Every step tested her patience. He had left no clear trail this time. The dust was disturbed in too many places. The rocks moved just enough to confuse her senses. She realized then that he was not fleeing blindly. He was leading her. He was drawing her in like he wanted her to follow. By dawn, she reached a narrow pass where the canyon walls squeezed together. She crouched low, sensing his presence. Her muscles tightened, ready to spring. But again, she felt that strange shift in her chest. Something about this hunt was different. She remembered the look in his eyes when he had seen her. There had been no fear there. There had been defiance, a silent challenge. She almost smiled, though she did not understand why. For so long she had believed humans weak. Yet here he was, alive on a world that killed even the strong, and he had stood against her. She told herself it was only a matter of time. No prey could escape her forever. She would catch him. She would end this. But in the quiet of that canyon morning, she could not shake the feeling that the human was not the one being hunted. Perhaps, without knowing, she had stepped into his game. The sun rose again over the broken lands of Arcanine, and the heat spread like fire across the stone. Kara stood on a high ridge with her eyes searching the canyons below. She had tracked many creatures in her life, beasts larger than her, killers faster than her, and yet she had never known one that unsettled her as much as this human did. She had thought him weak, soft, easy to break, but he was still alive and he had outsmarted her twice. She replayed the moment when he looked at her in the dark. The way his eyes had locked on her, even though she had moved with silence, made her chest tighten. She had been trained to be unseen, but he had seen her. She told herself it was luck, some accident of chance, but deep inside she knew better. He had been waiting. Tara dropped from the ridge and began her search again. The canyon twisted like a maze, and every turn carried new traps. Once she stepped on loose stones, and a hidden snare nearly caught her foot. Another time she brushed against a branch tied with sharpened spikes that would have torn her side if she had not noticed in time. Each trap was simple, nothing her people would ever call advanced, but together they formed a net of danger. It was not the work of prey. It was the work of someone who refused to surrender. By midday, she found his trail near a dried riverbed. She crouched low and studied the prints. His steps were deep and his pace had slowed. He was tired, his body reaching its limit, but still he moved forward. She could almost feel his stubborn spirit pressed into the ground with every footprint. She followed and soon heard the sound of water. In the shadow of broken cliffs, the man knelt by a pool no larger than her hand. He dug at the mud and gathered drops into a crude container made of bark. His face was hard with exhaustion, his lips cracked, but his eyes still searched the land with sharpness. He was ready for her. Kara stayed hidden and watched. She could end it now. One strike and his struggle would be finished. Yet her body did not move. She wanted to see more. She wanted to understand how he kept going when every part of this world pressed against him. The wind shifted, and he suddenly turned his head. His eyes searched the cliffs as if he could feel her gaze. He rose with his spear in hand, and for a long moment they stared at each other across the pool. No words were spoken, only the silence of heat and stone between them. She saw the lines of pain on his body, but also the fire that had not gone out. He lifted the spear slightly as if daring her to come closer. She stepped into the open. For the first time she let him see her clearly. Her armor shone faintly in the sun, her claws glinted sharp, and her tall form cast a long shadow over the Kimtu sand. She expected him to shrink, to falter, but he stood as firm as the rocks. Kara circled him slowly. He shifted his stance to keep her in sight, his spear steady. He looked nothing like the warriors of her people, but in that moment he carried the same weight, the same refusal to fall. She lunged forward, her claws cutting through the air. He blocked with the spear, and the force drove him back, but he did not fall. She struck again and again, testing his strength, his speed, his spirit. Each time he bent, but did not break. At last she knocked the spear from his hands and pressed him against the cliff wall. Her claws rose for the final blow, but then a roar shook the canyon. From the shadows emerged a beast with fangs like knives and skin armored with scales. It was larger than both of them, a predator of the deep canyons, and its eyes locked on Kira as it charged. She turned to face it, but the strike came too fast. At the last instant, the human grabbed her arm and pulled her aside. The beast's jaws snapped on empty air where her head had been a moment before. Kara stumbled, and the man seized a broken spear from the ground, driving it into the beast's eye. The creature howled, thrashing in pain, and retreated back into the shadows. Breathing hard, Kara stared at him. His hands were cut, his body shaking, yet he stood between her and the danger as if to shield her. She could not understand. Why would prey save the hunter who had tried to kill him? He picked up his spear again and glanced at her. For a moment his expression softened, almost as if he pitied her. Then he turned and walked away into the canyon without a word. Kara remained where she stood, her chest heavy. She had been trained to believe humans were fragile, weak, and cowardly. Yet this one had faced her strikes without fear and had risked his life to save hers from the beast. The lines of prey and predator no longer felt clear. As night fell, she climbed the ridge and looked out over the silent land. In the distance she saw the glow of his small fire, hidden between stones, a fragile light against the endless dark. She told herself that tomorrow she would end it. Tomorrow she would strike and bring back his head. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face again, weary but unbroken, and the image refused to leave her. She lay awake with the strange feeling that she was not only the hunter anymore. Something else was happening, something her people had never prepared her for. The human was still alive, and as long as he breathed, the hunt would not be simple. The days passed like a silent game played across the canyon lands. Kara followed the human through the dust and the stone. Each step of his a puzzle that drew her deeper into thought. She had begun the hunt with pride and with certainty, but now she felt a weight she could not name. Each time she thought she had him cornered, he found a way to slip free. Each time she believed she understood him, he did something that unsettled her. She remembered the moment he had saved her from the beast. The memory pressed into her like a stone that refused to move. She was a hunter, sworn to bring his life to an end, yet he had pulled her from the jaws of death without hesitation. She told herself it was strategy. Perhaps he wanted her alive for his own survival, but in his eyes she had seen no calculation, only instinct. That instinct was not weakness. It was something stronger, something she had no word for. One night, as the moons hung low and the wind howled across the cliffs, Kara found him again. His fire was small, shielded by rocks, but it gave her enough light to see him. He was crouched over the flames, mending the point of his spear with steady hands. His face was thin from hunger, but his eyes still burned with life. She could have struck from the shadows, ended the hunt at last, but her body did not obey. Instead, she stepped out into the open. The man turned at once, his spear lifted. For a long moment, they stood facing each other across the fire. She did not raise her claws. He did not attack. The silence stretched until at last he lowered his weapon, just slightly, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement. She moved closer and sat on the opposite side of the fire. Neither spoke, but the crackle of flames filled the gap between them. That night was the first they shared without violence. She watched how carefully he used the smallest pieces of wood, never wasting, always mindful. He tore strips of dried root and ate slowly, chewing each bite as if it were the last. He glanced at her once, as if to offer, and she felt a strange warmth stir in her chest, though she shook her head. The next day brought another storm across the desert. The wind screamed and the sand cut like knives. Kara had seen storms tear apart even armored beasts. Yet when she searched for the man, she found him building a shelter from stone and branches. He worked with a calm focus, his hands raw, his breath harsh, but he built until the walls held. When the storm struck, she joined him inside. They sat close as the wind roared outside, and in that narrow space she heard his breath and felt the stubborn pulse of his life. When the storm ended, he stepped out and looked at the sky with tired eyes, and for the first time she asked him a question. Her voice was low and rough from disuse. She asked why he had not left her to die when the beast attacked. He turned to her, and his answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do. The words echoed in her mind long after. The right thing. Her people had no such thought. For them, there was only strength and victory, duty and survival. To act for something else was foolish. Yet the human had done it without pause. She tried to tell herself it was weakness, that his compassion would one day destroy him. But as she looked at him patching his torn clothes with a needle made from bone, she could not believe it was weakness. She saw in him a strength different from hers, a strength she had never known. As days passed, they walked together at times, though always with caution between them. She still carried her claws ready, and he still kept his spear close, but when beasts came from the cliffs, they fought side by side. She watched him strike with clever angles, using speed rather than force, and she found herself admiring his courage. He had no armor, no claws, no fangs, yet he met danger with unshaken eyes. Slowly their silence broke into small words. His voice was softer than hers, his words plain, but each time he spoke she listened more than she expected. He told her he had been part of a crew, that their ship had been attacked, that he had stayed behind so they could escape. He did not speak with bitterness. He spoke with quiet acceptance. Sacrifice had been his choice. That night she thought about the weight of duty that her own people placed upon her. They demanded victory, obedience, strength without question. She had never chosen anything for herself. Yet this human had chosen to remain behind, to give up safety so others could live. She felt the lines of her world beginning to blur. The next morning her communicator crackled with the voices of her people. The signal pierced through the silence like a blade. They demanded her report. They demanded the human's death. They spoke of honor and duty, of shame if she returned empty. Their words were sharp and merciless. She stood on the ridge with the device in her hand and looked down at the human gathering water below. He did not hear the call of her people. He only worked with quiet patience, living one more day in a world that wanted him dead. She knew what her people expected. She knew the punishment that awaited her if she defied them. But she also knew that to strike him down now would be more than killing a man. It would be killing something she had just begun to understand. Her claws tightened and her heart thundered. For the first time in her life, she felt truly torn between the life she had been given and the choice she wished to make. The hunt was no longer simple. The prey was no longer prey. And as the sun bled red across the horizon, she realized that tomorrow she would have to decide who she truly was. The message from her people echoed in her mind long after the voice faded. Their order had been clear. The human was to die. His presence on this world was an insult to their pride and a danger to their secrets. He was nothing more than prey that had been allowed to live too long. Her claws tightened around the communicator until the metal bent beneath her grip. She was expected to obey. She was always expected to obey. Kara stood on the ridge and looked down at the man below. He was crouched near a pool of water, patching his spear once again. His movements were slow, tired, but steady. He had survived every storm, every beast, and every ambush she had set for him. More than that, he had saved her when he could have let her die. Her people would never understand such an act. To them, compassion was weakness, yet she could not forget the strength she had seen in him. For the first time in her life, Kara felt the weight of choice pressing heavy against her chest. She could finish her mission, strike him down, and return to her people as a warrior who had fulfilled her duty. Or she could defy them, turn against everything she had been raised to believe, and protect the very prey she had been sent to kill. Both paths would mark her forever, but only one felt true. That night she did not sleep. She watched the human from the shadows as he built another small fire, shielded by stones as always. He sat beside it with his back straight, his face lit by the faint glow. He did not know she was there, but something about him gave her the feeling that he sensed it anyway. She thought about his words, about why he had saved her. Because it was the right thing to do. She had never lived by such an idea, but the more she thought about it, the more it felt like something worth fighting for. The next morning the sky was heavy with the gray of an approaching storm. Kara walked down from the ridge and stood before him without hiding. His eyes rose to meet hers, wary but not afraid. She told him her people had ordered his death. She told him they would be coming soon. His face did not change. He only asked if she would obey. For a long moment she said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a blade. At last she shook her head. She told him she could not. His eyes softened, just a little, and she felt a warmth in her chest that she had never known before. The storm broke that afternoon. Winds howled and sand tore across the canyon. Kara and the human sheltered together in a cave, their backs pressed to the stone while the world outside raged. She spoke of her people, of the training and the chains of duty that bound her since childhood. He listened without judgment, only nodding as if he understood. Then he told her more of his story. He had been part of a crew sent to explore this region. Their ship had been attacked and damaged beyond repair. He had stayed behind to hold off the enemy so the others could escape. He had known it might mean death, but he had chosen it anyway. Kara listened to his words and felt something stirring within her. Sacrifice was not weakness. Compassion was not weakness. He had lived by those beliefs even on this world that tried to kill him. He had endured pain and hunger, loneliness and danger, and still he had not given up. That spirit shone brighter than the weapons and strength her people so admired. The storm passed, but her decision was already made. When her people arrived, she would not hand him over. She would stand against them, even if it meant her own death. At dawn, the sound of engines echoed across the canyon. Dust rose in the distance as the warships of her people descended. Warriors in black armor spread across the land with weapons drawn. Kara stood tall beside the human, her claws ready, her heart steady. He looked at her with a question in his eyes, but she only gave a small nod. Her commander stepped forward, a figure towering and cruel, his voice sharp with anger. He demanded she fulfill her mission. He called the human nothing, a stain to be erased. Kara felt her blood burn at his words. She had believed them once, but now she saw the lie. The human was not nothing. He was more than they could see. When she refused, the commander raised his weapon. The battle began in a storm of fire and steel. Kara fought with fury, her claws cutting through armor, her body moving with speed born of defiance. The human fought at her side with his spear and his traps, using the land itself as a weapon. Together they struck like storm and flame, and for the first time Kara felt what it meant to fight not alone but with another. The warriors pressed hard, but the canyon became their enemy. Rocks fell from traps the human had set, fire spread from fuel he had hidden, and Kara's claws tore through every gap in their line. She heard shouts, curses, the roar of weapons, but still she stood. The human bled from cuts and bruises, yet his eyes never dimmed. At last the commander himself charged. He struck Kara down with a blow that sent her to the ground. Pain tore through her chest and she tasted blood. She tried to rise, but her body faltered. The commander raised his blade to finish her, but before the strike could fall, the human hurled his spear with all his strength. The weapon pierced through the commander's armor, and the giant staggered, roaring in rage before he fell. Silence spread across the canyon as the remaining warriors retreated, their leader fallen, their pride broken. Kara lay on the ground, her body failing, her vision dark. She felt the human lift her in his arms, his voice calling to her, though she could barely hear the words. She wanted to tell him to leave her, to save himself, but her voice would not come. The last thing she saw before the dark closed around her was his face above hers, his eyes fierce with a promise she did not understand. The world around her drifted, in and out like a dream. Kara felt the weight of her body, but not the strength to move it. She heard the sound of footsteps, the scrape of stone, the rush of wind through narrow canyons, and always the steady beat of another heart close beside her. She opened her eyes once and saw the human carrying her through the dust, his face pale with exhaustion, yet unbroken by fear. She wanted to tell him to leave her, to save himself, but no words would rise. Darkness took her again. When next she woke, she lay inside a shelter made of stone walls and branches covered with hides. A fire burned low at the center, casting a warm glow. The air smelled of smoke and herbs. Her wounds had been bound with strips of cloth. Her chest still burned with pain, but the bleeding had slowed. She turned her head and saw him near the fire, his hands working with quiet focus as he ground dried roots into powder. He looked worn, his arms marked with cuts, his clothes torn. Yet his eyes stayed sharp. He noticed she was awake and moved closer. He held a small bowl of water to her lips. She drank and felt the coolness run through her dry throat. She tried to rise, but he pressed her back gently. His voice was calm as he told her she needed rest. She looked at him, and for the first time in her life felt something that was neither pride nor duty. It was trust. Days passed as she healed. The human tended her wounds with care, bringing water, sharing food, keeping the fire alive when the nights grew cold. He never complained, though his own body showed signs of hunger and strain. He spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He told her of stars beyond this world, of places where life was not ruled only by strength but by hope. She listened, and each story widened something inside her that had always been kept narrow by the chains of her people. When she was strong enough to walk, they left the shelter and began to move across the land together. The warships had gone, but Kara knew her people would not forget her defiance. She was no longer their warrior. She was their traitor. Yet as she walked beside the human, each step told her she had chosen the path she could live with. The journey was hard. Food was scarce, water rarer still. Storms swept across the plains without warning, and beasts stalked them from the shadows. Yet through it all the human never faltered. He taught her new ways to find water, how to set traps that used only stone and vine, how to hide their fire from wandering eyes. She, in turn, used her claws and her strength to protect them from the larger predators. Slowly they became more than hunter and prey. They became partners. One night they sat on the ridge where the stars stretched wide across the black sky. She asked him why he kept going, why he had not given up when the world pressed so hard against him. He looked at her, and his answer was simple, as it always was. Because giving up meant death, and as long as he was alive, there was still a chance for something better. His words burned into her heart like a brand. She had lived her whole life for duty, never for hope. But now she felt the meaning of hope rising inside her. As the moons shifted and the seasons turned, Kara knew her people would come again. They would not allow her betrayal to stand. And when they came, they would kill him if they could. The thought filled her with a fear she had never known, a fear not for herself, but for him. She had been a hunter, a predator who never allowed weakness. But now she understood that to love someone was not weakness. It was the strongest thing she had ever felt. The attack came at dawn. A smaller squad this time, their blades sharp, their voices full of vengeance. Kara stood with the human at her side, her claws ready, her heart steady. The battle was fierce, but together they fought as one. He struck with speed and cunning, while she struck with power and fury. The ground shook with their struggle, but in the end, they stood while the others fled into the desert, broken and humiliated. When the silence returned, Kara looked at him. His face was streaked with sweat and blood, his chest heaving with breath, but his eyes met hers without fear. She stepped closer and touched his hand with her claw, a gesture of bond that her people gave only to those they swore to protect. She told him that from that day she was his not as prey, not as predator, but as equal. His lips curved into the faintest smile, and he squeezed her hand. Together they built a new shelter deeper in the canyon, hidden from eyes above. The days grew into weeks, the weeks into months. They lived not as hunter and hunted, but as companions who shared fire, food, and laughter. Kara felt her heart change in ways she had never believed possible. She had once thought strength was only in claws and steel, but the human showed her that true strength was in kindness, in loyalty, in the will to protect not just oneself, but another. One evening, as the stars burned bright above, Kara sat beside him by the fire. She thought back to the beginning, to the day she had first tracked him across the desert, believing he was weak. She remembered the traps, the fire in his eyes, the way he had saved her when he could have let her die. She whispered that once. She had hunted him like prey, but in the end, it was his spirit that had hunted her heart and claimed it. The fire crackled. The wind carried the sound of distant beasts, and the stars stretched endless above them. Yet in that moment, in the quiet warmth they shared, Kara knew she had found something greater than any hunt, greater than any victory. She had found a bond that would never break, and so the hunter who had been sent to claim a life instead found her own heart tamed by the one she was meant to destroy. Together they walked forward into the unknown, no longer predator and prey, but two souls bound by choice, by trust and by love. The end.